nonprofit, and even going to touch on a little bit about your family preparedness. So we're going to dive in on how disaster preparedness relates to every aspect of really your life and business. So we're going to talk about something that I'm not sure if some of you have heard of, but it's called COOP. And COOP stands for Continuity of Operations Planning. It's an emergency management term that we use, but it's something that's something that right now is very important in emergency management, especially now with what we're facing with the pandemic. But COOP, just to clearly define it, it's you can see it there. It's the steps that your organization would take during times of disruption to ensure that you can continue your operations. So it's a plan that's going to work with you when you most need it. It's a plan that's going to be with you, and we'll talk a little bit about the different disruptions that could affect your business or your organization or your nonprofit. But we'll dive into that a little bit later. But again, a little bit more about COOP. A COOP is usually a plan that relates to three main areas, and I like to call it, and that's the people within your nonprofit, your employees, your staff. We'll talk a little bit about each of these as we move on through the presentation. We'll talk a little bit about the place, and the place is actually your structure, your organization, your business. And things, what do we mean by things? Well, it's those things that help your employees and your staff do the work that they need to do, like their necessary equipment. Next slide. And I think what LaShawn mentioned is we'll just go through the presentation, and if you have questions towards the end, I'll do my best to try to answer them, but I think that's what we're going to do for the duration of the time. We're going to talk a little bit now about COOP and really what makes up a COOP plan. And really, and I've used it often in emergency management, is you want to cover like your basics and that you would in any plan, like your who, what, when, where, why, and how. I usually use it in emergency management to make sure I cover all my bases. But one of the things we talk about is to make sure you have a good COOP plan is what types of events could cause a disruption to my organization? What things am I prone to or could affect my daily operations? So we'll talk a little bit about some of those things and that you want to think about when you're thinking about preparing your plan. We'll talk a little bit about where could we or where should we go, meaning what happens when a disruption happens to your business or your organization, your nonprofit, and how do you continue doing those social service organizations and being able to function properly on a daily basis. We'll talk a little bit about another is how would we communicate your message of relocation. So communication is key, right? In a disruption is how am I going to communicate, just as simply as how am I going to communicate with my staff? How am I going to let them know updates on what's happening with the disruption that's gone on with our nonprofit? We'll also talk a little bit about what does your organization do that's most important. So we call it, what are your essential missions or your essential functions that you need in order to continue your operations? And then lastly, you want to talk about what items do you need to continue to function and do your daily operations. So COOP plans have a really concentrate on the people and the staff and being able to make sure that we can continue to work as effectively and still continue to provide those essential social service functions that you all provide. Some plans could go as big or as small. I mean, they're really tailored to your organization, but some plans have even plans within plans, like one for a finance department, one for your HR. So you can make it as comprehensive as maybe as you would like, or as simple as you like. that's definitely something you should just keep on hand. And as LaShawn mentioned, one of the things that we talk about is a plan. It is something that you want to make sure that you update regularly. It's not just one of those things that we do once and we forget about it, but we want to make sure that we look at it. You might have updates and things that you need to do, and we'll talk a little bit more about what kinds of things you should be looking at and updating on a regular basis. So yes, this is the slide that I wanted to talk to you about and come back to about some of the possible threats that your organization, your nonprofit could face. So in emergency management, we say that we work all kinds of disasters, and I've been able to work in about 90, either natural or man-made, over the course of my tenure. And unfortunately, it's something that is here and that we're facing, and it's a threat that's continuing to increase. And any one of these things actually are disasters or that could cause disruption to our nonprofit here in Tallahassee. And as you can see here, we have what? We have thunderstorms, we have flooding, we have tornadoes, hazardous materials, spills, hurricanes, lightning, COVID, bioterrorism. I mean, all kinds of things happen just to our general area or to the Big Bend area, if you will, on a regular basis. In emergency management, we're monitoring these things on 24/7, 7 days a week to make sure that we are offering the best support we can to those that need it at the local level. So things to think about when you're thinking about your plan are some of those disruptions that could affect your organization. Talking a little bit more about what could be catastrophic. Some things that are catastrophic to me may not be to another person or may not be to an organization, but just to touch on family preparedness, a pipe burst in your home and a flooding in your home may not be something that is something might be important to your organization, but it sure is to you as a family. So catastrophic or disruptions can be a number of things, and here are some others that are true to our area. It's winter storms, it's wildfires, it's mold, and we talked about the pipe burst. Those items are things that, especially if here with our agricultural area, that we face a number of things having to do with also agricultural crops that are impacted by the weather. So we talked a little bit that the COOP plans isn't just about the plan or your structure or your business in itself, but it's also it's about your staff, right? It's about your personnel, it's about your people, and it's about all those things that could cause disruption to them as well. The flu, the pandemic, we're living COVID, is a prime example of that. And how it can affect not just like your staff level, your turnover, your capacity. Do you have depth enough in your organization to make sure that you have support for the changing staff that you may need? And also IT, those technological issues that always arise when we have a disruption, and how do you deal with those? So we'll talk a little bit more about those as we move on through the presentation. So some of the major sections, now we're kind of getting into the little meat and potatoes about what you should have in your COOP plan. And these are like the 6 primary essential functions you should have in your COOP plan. And one, as you can see there, it's your people, it's your team, right? It's your staff. It's who are the people that are responsible for your daily functions. And it's important to have, and we'll talk a little bit about it, but it's important to have their contact information updated. And that's the thing that we find mostly is to just be able to contact and have that communication with your staff is essential. And we'll talk a little bit about what you would do when you face a disruption and how you do communicate with your staff. The next is order of succession. So what do we mean by that? We mean that, let's say Amber defaults to LaShawn for UPHS, but who does LaShawn default to in case they're both doing other things at the time of disruption? So it's having that organizational structure, if you will, your organizational chart. But the essential thing is identifying those key positions and who you want responsible to look over the staff or to continue some of those essential operations to continue to operate when you're facing a disaster event. The next is a primary or alternate facility. So one of the major components of the COOP plan is, let's say a tree falls on your home or at your business operation and you're just not able to function there. It's completely uninhabitable and just not safe on any terms. Well, where do you continue to provide your essential functions? Have you identified that alternative facility? And we'll talk a little bit about what could be some possible things that may be an alternative facility for your organization. The next is essential functions. We talked a little bit about what are those primary functions that are essential for your organization. Now, there's a lot of things that we do in a business or an organization, right? And maybe we have our event planning, but maybe that's not, for this instant, for the COOP plan, considered an essential function at the moment. It is for fundraising and for a regular basis, right? To continue to increase that funding base for our organization, but perhaps it might not be something you deem or identify as essential. And we'll talk a little bit about what may be some of the things you want to consider when you're considering about essential functions. The next is vital records and vital resources. So every organization has those elements or those documents that are absolutely vital to your organization. Could be your COOP plan, right? It could be a number of things, maybe your financial records. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those resources or some of those items that are maybe a consideration for your nonprofit. And lastly, it's communication. How do you communicate vital information to your staff so that they're informed on a regular basis on how you're moving through the disruption and how you can continue to provide those essential services? So now we're just going to get into digging into a little bit more about those 6 essential services that are, or elements that are necessary for your COOP. So in regards to order of succession, it's identifying those key positions for your organization, right? You want to look at those individuals and those positions that are essential to take over once that maybe that head person is now wearing a different hat, because during an emergency management time or disruption, you find that all of a sudden you're faced with perhaps 2 parallel roles and you're wearing 2 hats at the same time. I know a number of you and all of us wear a number of hats just in our regular lives, but now we're adding another hat. We're adding maybe an emergency function role that wasn't necessarily part of the necessary structure in order to set up the nonprofit. So it could be who is the emergency management liaison, who is going to be filtering in information in and out of the organization, keeping the organization up to date with current events in the emergency management and the weather, or how is that going. So it's really putting in your thinking cap and how you can address those things. Also, it could be whether you have to establish a call center. And if you have a call center manager, that could be something that is also another position that you want to think about. So there are a number of positions that you want to think about in times of disaster, especially during a disruption to your nonprofit. And also, what's the order of sequence and who can I identify that can take that responsibility on. And of course, we can't not talk about pandemic food planning. So one of the essential functions now of the plan, and it's new to us in emergency management, we did have pandemic, but we didn't have anything related to COVID. So now we are really including that as a section and as an important element of all our future COOP plannings and how we continue to operate. So that's definitely something that all the COOP plans will have in the future, and that we want to press upon and encourage all the nonprofits here in the area to make sure that they have that as part of their planning. Essential functions. We talked a little bit about what are the essential functions that are important to your nonprofit to continue to operate. And here are a couple that we find that on a routine basis is important probably across the board, and that's finance, right? How do you continue to pay your employees? What's payroll? How do you continue to perhaps continue to provide that social service or that financial piece to those that need it most during a disaster event, because that's now compounded. If on a regular basis, you all know that you're stretched enough as it is in emergency management, or when you have a disruption, now you're adding another disruption or another element to those lives that have already been impacted. And unfortunately, what we find is that those vulnerable populations are always the ones that are continuously impacted during a disaster event. So you want to identify and prioritize those essential functions, like what are the keys. So not just identifying which ones, but you want to prioritize what is like the most important thing that is important to your nonprofit or your organization. And that's just a little bit of a side note, and we'll probably get into that in part 2, is how you really want to address it in the COOP plan, but you want to put those action verbs. It's like your ability to print, or your ability to print out checks, or whatever it may be. So, yeah. Your next is vital records and vital importance and vital resources. So one of the items that we always talk about is that your organization may have important vital records and vital resources that come in two fashions, right? One may be hard copy and one may be electronic. So one of the things that we find is that many organizations don't necessarily think about backup. I mean, they have the backup system and they assume that it's backup on a daily basis, but you really don't really interact with that IT part of it. And that is something that we really stress in COOP and in our emergency management planning, is to ensure that you have that piece covered and that you are working in tandem with your IT, and that your databases, your software, all of that is backed up on a nightly basis, not just from time to time. In addition to that, many essential hard copy documents that you may have, whether it's your bylaws, your contact information, or whatever, may just be in a folder in a file somewhere. You want to ensure that you have copies of those, for one, and second, make sure that you can put them in some sort of electronic database where they're routinely saved. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. I got into a little bit about that. Make sure that they're routinely backup and they're duplicated. But here's probably the key piece to vital records and resources, is to ensure, and we'll talk about it later in family preparedness as well, but to make sure that your documentation, or that at least those hard copies, is protected, meaning that you do have it in waterproof containers, safe containers, where they aren't impacted by anything having to do with the weather or any future disruption. So you want to make sure you have your documentation as protected as possible. Alternative facilities. So as I mentioned, alternative facilities is probably one of the key pieces of COOP planning, and it's, where do I continue to operate and how do I continue to do my essential functions if my current organization or my current place of business is just uninhabitable, unsuitable, not safe, not sanitary. Those are one of the three things we use at FEMA and emergency management, is if safe, secure, and sanitary. If those three things are not part of your current facility that's been disrupted, then you want to ensure that you find an alternate facility, or is it going to be part of your planning to just say, well, employees, staff, we're just going to work from home for for the duration of the event until things get to a working order, or until we're able to restore our facility or our structure back to those three things, to a place where it's safe, secure, and sanitary to continue our daily operations. In some cases, it may be that it's difficult to find an alternate facility. So, there are different options that we suggest, and one of those is always perhaps there's an organization that's similar, that provides a similar service that you can perhaps co-locate with, and that merge or that partnership I've seen work in different areas of the state, but that's a consideration. That may be your alternative facility, is working with another partner. In some cases, you want to make sure that whatever you determine is going to be your alternate facility, that it is suitable for your needs. Does it have that proper space, that proper court, that proper parking, that proper lighting, that whatever it might be? So you want to make sure that it is something that you can absolutely relocate, or are you going to just probably reduce the size to just the essential function capacities? So definitely things to consider when you're thinking about your COOP plan. Communications, we've talked about communications, but what happens, and communication is always the key zing that we get in emergency management. It's very difficult to ensure that all your stakeholders or all your staff or all of them are getting all the necessary information in, and that they're transitioning that information in and out of your space. So what we find is that communication is key to your success of your COOP planning, but it's also key to any disruption and any emergency management disruption you might face. So you want to ensure that personnel is aware of the disruption, and you want to keep them aware of what's happening on a regular basis with the emergency weather or the emergency management disruption. One of the things we found that's an effective communicative method is to just develop what we call a phone tree. Because I think what happens is, oh my gosh, I've been impacted, my business is impacted, who do I call, what do I do, who do I call first? Is it finance? Is it my director? Is it my deputy director? Is it my board chairman? So identifying your phone tree is essential. Who's the first person? Who's the second? Who's the third? And who are they going to call? So your phone tree calling system is really important to make sure you have that nailed down when you're thinking about COOP planning. Also, a lot of information is found, right, by electronic methods, social media, your website. What happens if that goes down? Are you still, if it's still one of your only functions of maintaining communication, how are you going to update it on a regular basis? Can it be done? And also something else to consider, well, our phone lines are down at our main office. Do I need to get an alternate 800 number? Do I have that established? So those are just some alternative methods to think about that can help you with your communication piece when you're thinking about COOP planning. Training and exercise is something that we do on a regular basis with emergency management. It's one of the important pieces that I think we tend to forget when we think about our plan, but it's very important to do what we call exercising your plan, really putting your plan into action. Perhaps maybe doing a little drill or an exercise on, doing a disaster scenario and doing a phone tree, seeing if that works effectively.
Marcia, if I can jump in with a question real quick.
Sure.
Definitely for our members who are, direct service providers and they have clients, how often should agencies conduct emergency management drills? Like, what's best practice?
Oh, yes. So really in emergency management, we say that a best practice is to review your plan and to exercise and train your plan at minimum 2 or 3 times a year. And we say that probably at the start of hurricane season, at the end of hurricane season, or at the start of a new year. So we kind of try to space it out at a minimum to try to do some comprehensive emergency management planning or training exercise to that plan on at least 2 or 3 times a year. We found that that's proven at least pretty successful in the past. And you could take bite size. You could perhaps, like as I mentioned, probably do a drill. Maybe you want to just test your equipment. Maybe you just want to test your communications. Maybe you just want to test your phones. Maybe you got a new 800 number. Maybe you want to just go down your phone tree. Maybe you want to tackle this drill and exercise when you know that everybody's at a conference and not in the office. Maybe you want to tackle it when there is an impending event, and what would you do? So lots of good things, and we certainly could help with any training and exercises and ideas for your nonprofit, absolutely. But to continue, the great thing about training and exercising and in your plans is that it helps you identify gaps. It helps you identify, like, whoa, we didn't do so hot in our communication planning, or we didn't do so well in maybe our systems isn't backed up nightly, or we weren't able to reach certain people. We didn't have their contact information updated. So there's a number of things that when you look and you actually train and exercise your plan, that you can identify some gaps that you can refine and really try to nail down for the hopefully for the next event, or when we don't have a next event, right? But the essential key to training and exercise, most importantly, is training your staff and making sure your staff understands the roles and not just their day-to-day roles, but now, as we mentioned, perhaps their emergency management role that they would take. Maybe they're going to be the call center manager. Maybe they're going to be a part of the call center. Maybe they're going to be your meteorologist for the time. Maybe they're going to be the emergency management liaison and working with local staff. So you want to make sure that your staff is trained not only on their current roles, but on their emergency roles if they would have one, and to make sure that they understand the communication system. And it doesn't have to be, and one of the things that I like to say, it doesn't have to be a big what we call functional exercise where we actually bring in SWAT teams or whatever. You just want to make sure that it's something that's effective for your nonprofit, and it could be done in maybe your conference room, something as simple as that. The important piece is just to do something to practice and train and exercise your plan. And as we like to say in emergency management, we play like we practice, because it's really interesting how we find that the more we practice and exercise our plan, the better we are when we're actually faced with a disruption or with a disaster event of some kind. So where should we start? I know it sounds like a lot of information, but I think it starts by really having just a simple meeting with your core team, your leadership, perhaps your board, and having a discussion of how important is COOP to our organization to continue to run effectively and to continue our operations on a regular basis once we've been impacted by a disaster event or by some sort of disruption. Do we have just the basic contact information for our personnel? And again, asking those questions, those 5 key questions, the who, what, when, where, why, and how of COOP. We talked about it earlier, but again, making sure you cover those essentials, that would be a great basis to start thinking about your COOP plan and establishing one and writing up your plan. And LaShonda and I mentioned it earlier, but so I think we all love to have like just that beautiful plan that's all in this beautiful binder, looks gorgeous with all our tabs in it, and it's wonderful, and you certainly want that to be able to access and for it to be organized. But the key really is to use it, to update it, to make sure all your information is current with any new stuff you may have, or with anything new that you may need to add to your plan, and to make sure you train and exercise it. Because if not, it's just going to sit on your shelf and it's not really going to be an effective tool, which for your toolkit, as we call it, for in emergency management, for a disruption, or for a disaster event. So the key is just to plan now, and we'll talk a little bit about when you should plan, and to just think about it as a working document, if you will, a document that's just an ongoing process, and it's just part of your personnel or part of your basic organizational structure, like your bylaws. Because as the slide states, there's 3 items that just happen on a regular basis on your daily operations. You'll have changes in personnel, you'll have changes in IT, whether you're wanting to update your software, maybe wanting to do something more technology advanced, or you'll just have different procedures and different plans as you refine and grow your organization. So we mentioned planning and disaster planning. One of the things that we definitely, and we have what we call gray skies and blue skies planning and emergency management. And I just thought about it in here. We certainly don't want to do our planning, right? Our COOP planning when it's dark skies and right in the middle of a disaster event, or with impending hurricanes like we have now in the Atlantic. Certainly you want to ideally have your disaster planning, and you could go to the next slide, LaShawn, but you really want to plan for when it's blue skies, when it's beautiful out, when things are going well, when you don't have the pressure or to think about with the weather or the just a looming disaster event approaching your organization or our locality. So you really want to make sure that your planning is now. It's never too late. Planning is always essential, so the sooner the better. We talked a little bit about updating your plan, but it might seem something that's daunting, and it's we talked a little bit about 3 places you should start. But really you can think about your plan over a 12-month period, and maybe just taking a piece at a time to kind of make it a little bit more digestible and effective for your organization, because I know we all juggle a lot of things, and especially our nonprofits groups with their social services that they do. So maybe month 1, we have as an example there is you update your contacts. Month 2, maybe you think about what could be some alternate facilities. Maybe I can partner up with another organization that's similar to me and what I do and my social service. 3 is, where are my vital records? Do I have them in a waterproof container? Are they being backed up every night? 4, what are my essential functions? What is truly important in my organization to function? And so on. So you could see that there's a number of things. You can talk about your order of succession. Who would do what in the midst of a disruption? And of course, even considering and updating your plan is you want to make sure you add in there, when do I actually train and exercise my plan? Is it after I've established it? And when am I going to do it on a regular basis? And most importantly, and one of the things that are really done at the onset of a COOP planning is, what are my hazards? What could actually impact me and my nonprofit? Is it electrical power grid? Am I near dry cleaners that has spillage that could be hazardous to my organization or to my staff? Could be a number of things. And lastly, I have on their drive-away kits, and we'll talk a little bit that as we move into some of the things that are important to our own family planning and disaster planning. So can't hear you, LaShawn.
Sorry about that.
That's
So if
okay.
we're moving forward, we just want to see, did anyone have any questions or anything
Yes.
like that? We have probably about 16 minutes left before we'll start wrapping it up, but we wanted to just check in because that's a lot of good information. Yes. So feel free to unmute yourself if you do. And the slides will also be available. And then if you would like a copy of the recording, just send me a private email because this is great information to share with the other members of the team as well. All right, well, we're rolling.
Okay. So one of the things that I had on that slide was drive-away kits. In emergency management, we have these roll-away kits that we really put in there, all our essentials that we may need in order to move to an alternate facility to continue our daily operations. And for family planning, it's the same thing, is what would I have in my emergency supply kit or my disaster kit that I could simply roll into the car to have as something that would be helpful when I'm possibly in a shelter, in a hotel, with family, with friends, what have you, or at my alternate facility. So besides all the things that we've talked about, your equipment and your essential functions or your essential needs that you would have, these are some of the things, then I believe there are about 15 of them that we feel are really important to just having together, especially right at the height of hurricane season, instead of having to rush to the store. Just keeping with you a 3-day supply of water and food. Why do we say 3-day supply? 72 hours is really what we find in emergency management is the key time frame before federal, state, or other resources can actually get into the hands of our social service agencies. So we really want to ensure that every person has it like 1 gallon of water for drinking and for sanitation purposes during a time of disruption or disaster event, as well as, of course, non-perishable food. And don't forget that trusty can opener, because that seems to be one that folks forget. Of course, your battery-powered radio. If you can get a NOAA weather radio, I certainly encourage that. It's really helpful. It's great to have the latest up-to-date news on what's happening in your area. And of course, those extra batteries are always important, and a flashlight. First aid kit and masks. Now with COVID, we've seen how important masks are, but even during a disaster event, masks are important for us to just filter any contaminants in the air. Any contaminants after a disaster events are more prone in the environment, so we want to make sure that masks are part of your disaster supply kit, especially now during a pandemic. Also, something that we don't think about, but it's having those garbage bags or plastic to just dispose of any personal sanitation you may need. And key, and then you see everyone run to the gas station, is make sure you gas up your car and have a full vehicle when a disaster event is coming our way. Prescriptions and medications, make sure you have your glasses and have prescription medications, especially for yourself or for any vulnerable populations you may work with or elderly. Formula and diapers for those of you with children, pet food and water, also a 3-day supply for your pets. And again, we talked about important documentation. This is also true for your own family documentation, your own insurance policies, your bank accounts, whatever you feel is important for your own family. Important documentation, keep those also in a waterproof container. Have cash. Cash is best during a disaster event. You'll hear folks in emergency management say that all the time. Sometimes systems go down in the banking system and in our institutions, so having that liquidity and cash helps. Sleeping bags or blankets, always essential when you're moving to another facility or even co-locating with family or friends. having that change of clothes, your personal hygiene items, disposals, paper disposals, always important, and activities for your children. Those are some of the key areas. Before we close it up, LaShawn, can you bring up the other document that I sent you? And this is something that we came up with a while back, but I think it's going to be helpful. And we'll talk a little bit more about it in phase 2 or part 2 of our presentation. And as LaShawn said, we'll plan to do it pre-hurricane season, so early in the year. But we'll talk a little bit about how you can establish your own or write up at least the essential elements of your COOP. And one of the things that we found is just keeping a simple template is helpful. So we called it a little mini Cooper. So I know that a big COOP plan can seem daunting, but this may help. If you recall the 6 essential elements that we said are important for a COOP plan, we kind of just broke it down right here for you all to look at. And it's the 6 questions are there. We put them in that who, what, when, where, why, how template, and we put the 6 essential items that would be important to your COOP, especially for your nonprofit, your business, or your organization. So the first one we have there is risk. What are the risks or hazards that may potentially be threatening or potentially threat to my organization? And it includes, and you can see there, it includes a myriad of things, like, is it natural? Is it man-made? Is it infrastructure? What is it? But you can write a little thing, and that's just something you could have as, and that this could be your immediate little COOP, if you will. And at least you have something that you can have with you right now during this pandemic that we're facing and right in the midst of hurricane season. Also, then we have the other category of operations. What are the key essential functions that my organization needs to function and to continue our operations? The next is employees. Do I have all the essentials that I need in order to communicate with my employees? What is going to be the system that I'm going to use to communicate with them? And what will be my plan? And does my family and does my employees have disaster plans for their own family? So one of the things that we touched upon in family planning is that we find that in emergency management, we say it all the time, we have to take care of ourselves and our families first and foremost, right? Before we can really work effectively at our office. So we want to make sure that we have even our own personal planning in place. Who is our children going to be with if we have to go into the office? Who are we going to perhaps have to live with if my home's been destroyed because of a disaster event? So think about those things too as you move on. So think about your own personal family disaster plan and your own business disaster plan as well. The other item is who are my key clients and vendors and customers that I need to continue to service as we move on. Because as we know, we all work with our vulnerable populations and emergency managements. They always seem to be the ones that are more affected in emergency management. And now it's almost like a double whammy when they're impacted again because of a disaster event. So we want to make sure that we know who our clients are and how we can continue to help them during these extreme difficult times, and how could our business absorb that. In IT, we want to make sure that we have first and foremost our contact information for our IT guys and where they are, especially if they're off-site. We want to make sure that we have all of our vital records identified and that they're backed up and within the IT system, and that we actually have that system in place and insured and secured. The next one is finances. Finances are essential, right? We have to continue to be able to pay our employees, our staff. We want to make sure that we continue to feed the funding that we do to our clients that need us most. And we want to make sure that our own family finances are insured and covered, and that we have all those essential documentations protected. And I think those are our 6. So I know it's a lot of information. One of the things that I wanted to just give you just some things to think about, or some good takeaways that you could have as a tool for now. And in our last slide, LaShawn, if you don't mind going there, you can feel free to reach me with any questions you may have. Anything I could do to help, please reach out to me by email, or LaShawn or UPHS or Amber know how to reach me. But I'd be more than happy to work with you. Our organization with Thomas Health Ferguson and Disaster Strategies and Ideas that we've partnered up with actually do COOP plans, and we have them in electronic versions, so we can dig in as deep as you want into your own nonprofit. So we're more than happy to help in any way we can, but at least this gives you a good starting place to work from and to have an idea on how you can at least cover your essentials, especially now in the midst of hurricane season and in the midst of a pandemic. So we thought it would be timely to talk about those things, but it's certainly a lot to think about. But if like I said, if we take it in bite-sized pieces, it certainly makes it easier to deal with tackling our plan. LaShawn, if we can put up the email, that'd be great for them to feel free to reach out to me with any questions they may have on an individual level.
I'm actually gonna send it to them. I've gotten a lot of private messages.
Okay.
I'm actually gonna send it to everybody who registered, even the ones who couldn't come. I'll make sure they get it.
Yes, that'd be wonderful.
My good friend Sean from SSF does have a question.
Hi, Sean.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for information. I have to say it's overwhelming.
Oh, I'm sorry. I tried to keep it, I was trying to keep it where it's digestible, but I know it is a lot, and I know it could be overwhelming, and I think that's why we're here, right? And
yeah, but I appreciate
that do as a resource.
And I appreciate that you broke it down, especially sort of the monthly plan or the monthly check aspects. But my question is, what you've covered today is organizational contingencies.
Right.
In what we do, we have rent-free housing, so there might be an emergency in the house, doesn't necessarily affect the impact on the organization. So you're having sort of 2 different plans for those different purposes?
Yes, Sean, I would. And I made that as a bullet point. I didn't dive into it a lot, only because every nonprofit is unique. So I was trying to kind of make it as broad as possible that would be applicable to all. But many organizations such as yours, Sean, have multiple COOPs within a COOP, or so that you have your overall COOP for your organization, and then there's mini COOPs, I would say, within that to address like your offsite.
Okay, thank you.
To address your clientele that you serve offsite. So yeah, so we can talk about that, and it's but it's basically doing a mini COOP within the COOP, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We also have Robin with the question. Hey, Robin.
Hi, Robin.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much, Marcia.
Oh, you're welcome.
I have a question, and forgive me because I got on a little bit late, but here's my question. So we, as you know, but others might, I deal with issues around human trafficking, and we see that disasters and emergencies in and of themselves can be hotbeds where traffickers can swoop in.
Yes.
One of the things we're starting to work on is how to develop within our emergency management structure, how to inform them and the community about the presence of trafficking. So it's not so much our own organization trying to cope, which this is big, and
I understand.
I so appreciate this, but how do we integrate our issues? And there may be others, like I'm thinking about Kathy and Legal Services. Hi, Kathy. But how do we integrate the work that we do as social services providers into emergency planning that's done by FEMA or our emergency planning folks at the county and city and state levels?
So let's see if I understand the question a little bit. So it's how do you integrate with emergency management? Because, okay, and that is a great question. And it's something that I've been working on over the years, because emergency management does seem isolated, and we all tend to work in our silos, if you will, right? And it's how do we merge that? Well, the great thing about emergency management is that they are expanding and growing into working with the nonprofits, working with business, working with private sectors, working with others, and really embracing this whole community feel. And we actually have in emergency management what we call emergency support functions. And at the state level in emergency management, and at the federal level, well, for the state, we have emergency support function 15, which is volunteers and donations. And I used to be the emergency coordinating officer for that. But what we do is we actually coordinate and work with all of the nonprofits in the state. And that's represented by a group called VOAD, the Volunteer Organizations Active in Disasters. And that group is comprised of faith-based, community-based organizations that work with us in emergency management and we provide that two-way communication. Once again, we give them information on what's happening with the disaster event. We receive information from them on what they're doing at the local level to assist their social service residents, and we try to identify gaps and then go from there on how we can address them at a state level and then disperse it into a local level. But within that piece is included communication. Communication is a piece, just as that is in COOP, it's one of the pieces that we include within our conversations with our social service partners. So, and we work with another essential function we call public information, but I forget what number it is, but we work with them in order to make sure that if there's vital information that needs to be put out from our function, that it's put out in working with our public information officers, that it is put out to the state and the state officials, whether it's through news media, news conferences, PSAs, whatever medium we have, that's something that we work with. So, and we work a lot with our local leaders and from the local leaders in the area to make sure that they understand what we're doing in the area, and we're getting from them what their needs are. So one of the first things we do, and that's going a little bit to address like how do you address like the issue of human trafficking when an emergency management happens. We touch base with those local officials there to make sure that they know the work we're doing and we know the work they're doing, and we try to identify then the gaps, and that's where our emergency management coordination takes place, to try to make sure that everyone is fully aware and able to function. Does that help a little bit?
It does. And so would you say it's incumbent on a local organization like ours now to kind of reach out to our local EMS and or disaster planners or whatever those governmental entities are to just
Yes.
Let them know who we are.
Yes, let them know who we are when we want to be at the table and we want to know what's happening in emergency management, and we want you to know us and to help us talk our message, and let's work together because they're there and they have a function specifically for nonprofits and social organizations.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have one other question and then I have to pivot to another call.
Okay.
But Giovanni, I want to make sure I said that right, has a question.
Okay.
Yeah, and good morning. Thank you so much, UPHS, for hosting this, and for Marcia for taking the time.
Oh, thank you.
I'm with Kathy over at Legal Services of North Florida, and
Yes.
so
Hi,
yeah,
Kathy.
and so the presentation was great to provide a wonderful framework for some of the essentials for a COOP plan. My question is if you could provide any quick tips on how to make COOP plan flexible in instances of what we're seeing now when you have kind of a disaster, a global disaster such as the current pandemic that has kind of required certain aspects of a COOP plan to become the new normal, right?
Yes.
So any tips for making a COOP plan flexible for long-term changes to what are the normal protocol of the essential functions maybe, or, you know, the places and locations. Any, I know that could be probably a whole seminar in and of itself, but if you could highlight any aspects, that'd be very helpful for us.
That's a great question. So here's the beauty of COOP, and what I provided is just a broad overview that could be applicable to all nonprofits. But when we're working with an individual nonprofit, the COOP plan really takes its own unique path and its own unique characteristics, because and I like to give the example, what's pertinent to Miami-Dade County is not pertinent to Liberty County. They both face, their COOP plans are very different, as would be legal services, as would be from Robin's group. So, or Sean's, as Sean may have many COOPs within his. So one of the things that we've talked about in emergency management is ensuring that pandemic or COVID is part of the COOP planning now, and that takes on its own mini COOP. So it's a subsection of your overall COOP plan. And that's probably the easiest way to put it. There are certain particulars that would need to be addressed when it comes to that. Yeah, that's probably in its simplest form what you would need to do in order to have that. And certainly we'd be more than happy to help. But one of the key things that we want to ensure when we're thinking about COVID planning and pandemic planning within COOP is the safety of employees and staff, and being able to continue those social services. So a lot of it is geared towards that. It's geared towards safety. It's geared towards being able to continue to do the services while also protecting yourself and your staff. So that's probably one of the main components. And there's questions that we prompt you to kind of help address that.
All righty. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I have to hop on a call. I got to cover a couple other people who texted in the chat, said they had to hop on an 11 o'clock call. We may all be on the same call. But thank you very much, Marcia. Thank you, everybody, for attending. And I will make sure you all get this information. Bye, y'all.
Bye. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. You're welcome.